The eyes of millions were on a part-timer forcing down slow bouncers. Australia is the World Test Championship holder and also has the ODI World Cup. India has been the dominant force in bilateral cricket, was practically unbeatable for a long time at home, and now owns the T20 World Cup. They are also the financial and political muscle of the game. While Australia can still drop a casual 350,000 people on a test match. These are your big dogs of world cricket. Their players are the biggest names around as well. Virat Kohli sells newspapers, Pat Cummins is attacked for being too woke, and Sam Conster's got 200,000 Insta followers for 90 minutes of work. This is as big as Test cricket gets. Crowds, viewers, socials, you name it. It's bloody massive. And yet, twice in this series, Marnus Labuschagne has been bowling bouncers. Not because the game has been gone, but as an actual enforcer with a short pitch barrage of assorted powder puffs. The biggest series in tests, watched by hundreds of millions of people, and we've got Marnus bloody Labuschagne bouncing people. 3 wickets down, way too many to chase. The number 3 bowling shortstop. This game was drawn at T, but all the way through, this series refused to be normal. Cricket media used to be pretty simple. Find your favorite newspaper, head to Cricinfo, and maybe a blog you like. Now just finding the best stories and writing is a huge challenge. You already have a job. You just want to read about cricket. Well, that is what the best of cricket is currently doing. They go out daily to find the newest cricket coverage and the best stories from any publication in the world. And when they can't discover what they want, they also hire some of the best writers to produce their own great stories. You can get the best of cricket via their website or on WhatsApp. They find cricket's best stories and give them to you every day. Before India even arrived in Australia, many fans decided that this was over. If you can't even beat New Zealand at home, how are you going to rumble Australia? Throw in Sunil Gavaskar's 1980s beliefs that players shouldn't have paternity leave, and Mohammad Shami's injury, and this was a tough sell. And if people were worried beforehand, well, India failing with the bat in the first innings was almost it. This battle of the Titans was over after 1 innings. We had 4.5 tests of Australia to dominate in a boring fashion. That take did not actually survive that afternoon. Australia had some flaws, and Jasprit Bumrah found each and every one of them. Then India's whiz kid Jaiswal made a bunch of runs. Jaiswal was the one not handling Australia. Rohit Sharma, who has been at home at number 6 and is now opening this series, actually looked fine. Jaiswal could not lay a bat on Mitchell Starc. Rohit could. But unfortunately for Rohit, that included the ball that he went for a big drive and got an edge to carry. It was actually a really good ball, but still quite a baffling shot. That was bad for India after what was a fairly good start at just not being dismissed. Then KL Rahul came out, who's obviously been in very good form all the way through, and he got a ball that moved back in, and he still managed to edge it away. Even during this, Jaiswal continued to play and miss. In Perth, Australia completely lost the plot. They were embarrassing, and no one could remember when they'd been slapped like this before. And of course, Marnus was bowling. He actually bowled more than once, but let's not even get into that. Virat Kohli was back. Steve Smith was finished. India had not won a single test at home against the Kiwis. And now they'd strolled into Western Australia and smashed the Aussies in their big, fat mouths. Virat Kohli was cheered and booed when he came out on the MCG. The noises, of course, were more across patriotic lines. But even so, it sounded about right. He's either the hero you would die for, or the one who played long enough to be the villain. Early in his innings, he moved well. The savage sideways movement had eased. He looked more set than Jaiswal until Mitchell Starc bowled a wide one. It didn't do anything special. It was a succulent Chinese meal of a delivery. How could any compulsive cover driver resist? And most players would flay this through the offside and then walk down casually to fist pump their partner. Virat edged it. India were 33 for 3, and all that good early work was flushed. And so were they. The weird thing for the Adelaide test was that India's team could get better, and Australia's actually got worse. But the next match was a day-night one in Adelaide. And it turns out that although Australia were ended in the previous test, that was only red ball form. Mitchell Starc and Travis Head completely dominated the way they often do with the pink ball, and Mohammad Siraj decided to be the villain. The story at that stage was that India were frauds who got lucky with a fluky 295-run victory in the first test. The odd thing about this Melbourne wicket was how much it changed from the new to the old ball. Wickets often get easier to bat on, but this one went from a spicy meatball to an American cheese single wrapped in plastic. It was as if someone was dropping in another wicket midway through the innings. So all India had to do was survive the first 35 overs, but of course, they didn't. In the middle session, that didn't seem to matter all that much at all. Stark would bowl and then rub himself. Boland delivered some good deliveries but couldn't break through. Cummins and Lyon were not that difficult to play. And India's two attacking players kept their heads completely screwed on. Australia went an entire session without a wicket. And that is how we ended up with Marnus bowling. The only thing stopping Australia from bringing back the Gabba was biblical rains. Well, that and Josh Hazlewood's fitness. He missed the second test with a side strain, got fit, came back, and then picked up a calf strain. At the Gabba, that meant the Aussies were a bowler down, while also just running out of time. But also it meant that Australia had lost their best bowler to left-handers. But who cares? Australia was still awesome, and so was Travis Head. Travis Head has a thick torso of a player from another era. He is athletic, but not in a modern cricket athlete kind of way. You throw in the mustache, the unkept hair, and it no longer feels like you're watching a modern player at all. This is before you get to his bowling. He is slow and loopy, like a part-timer in a club match. Quite often he looks as threatening as a toddler with a toy lightsaber. But he is an off-spinner, so he could at least bowl to the lefties, and India had two of them out in the middle. Not that it mattered much at this point. Australia had drifted out to 27-1 with some bookies. Stark was looking stiffer than a teenage boy at a nude beach, and it felt like part of the reason Head was bowling was potential overrate penalties. In fact, 5 to 10 more overs of Rishabh Pant and Yashasvi Jaiswal would have meant that India were more likely to win the game than Australia. In fact, chances are that the Aussies would have started to play for a draw then as well. However, Head dropped a half-tracker. Rishabh tried to pull it into the Yarra Park, and he forgot how big the square boundaries of the MCG were. Australia had an end open. Jasprit Bumrah took all the wickets at the Gabba, and it still didn't matter. His bowling average at this point was negative. Australia was so completely on top that they could risk it all on the last day with declaration batting. That, of course, ended up in another Jasprit Bumrah-inspired mini comeback. It meant that the momentum hawks were saying that India had it and Australia did not. None of that changed much when Australia picked a teenager to open the batting, who then played and missed for a while before hitting peak fuck it mode. Then he took down the world's best bowler with scoops as if no one else had ever even contemplated it before. Momentum was Australia's. In fact, so much so that shortly after, Virat Kohli was finished and Steve Smith was back. In fact, India could not bat at all until a guy that they picked as their number 8 to bowl at Perth suddenly made 100. There was something off about Nitesh Kumar Reddy from the moment he strode out into the MCG the second time. Perhaps it was just early innings jitters or general tiredness, or maybe his body was a bit stiff. But the wonder boy with the straight blade from the first innings looked off. If he was going to have an issue, it surely wasn't going to be with Nathan Lyon, who he played with a wink in the first knock. But that is who dismissed him. That brought in Ravi Jadeja, one of the world's best players who has been little more than a sparsely used role player in this series. With the win now impossible again, it would be Jadeja's soft hands and blocker mentality that would save the game. Except he got a ball that jumped off an imaginary trampoline 42 centimeters higher than expected. Let me give you the technical term for that. Bloody loads. The expected average on a ball like that must be like 5 or 6. And most of those would be edges over the slips. India were now left with Jaiswal and Washington Sundar, a man who was brought in to bat at 8 and not bowl much in this game. Australia's third innings at the MCG was simple. Survive the new ball, push on quickly against the old one, get 350 plus ahead with enough time to use the new ball at dusk, again in the morning, and then have a fair chunk of the second new one available to them the following evening. Absolutely none of that happened. Australia actually survived the new ball, but then the slightly older one absolutely destroyed them. When Alex Carey was out, they were 91 for 6, and India were the favourites for the match. But Marnus used his main skill, just not being dismissed, though it looks like he might, every ball. And Pat Cummins added in extra runs to get them back to even. If you would ask someone what Pat Cummins is as a bowler, they would talk about him being Mr. Top of Off. But for a bloke with such rigid line of length, he gets an awful lot of wickets with the short ball. And he hasn't bowled it all that much in this series. At Perth, he let Marnus try it instead. And as the series has gone on, he started to deploy it a little bit more when needed. With India blocking their way towards the second new ball, after Jaiswal tried to slog silly point back, the short ones were just needed. However, the actual bouncer was poor. It was not a wicket taker. Cummins is so accurate with his short balls, but this one was down the leg side and usually would be a boundary or just a miss. Instead, Jaiswal smashed it through to the keeper, except that Joel Wilson disagreed. And then so did Snicko. Despite the very obvious deviation, there was really barely a flicker at all. And that is what could have saved Jaiswal. It had been a very bizarre 24 hours for him. He dropped 3 catches in the field, including one that made his usually sanguine captain strop. He batted awfully to start this innings, and then batted slower than he's ever moved unless he was once caught in a tar pit. But he had worked through that terrible day to play a fine innings that first gave India a chance of an unlikely win, and then he was shoring up the draw when this delivery happened. The umpire decided to go with his eyes over the technology. Later, Hawkeye would confirm the deviation that could only have been from bat and glove. But many times, a third official not overrule Snicko. So Jaiswal got lucky with the umpire, unlucky with the final decision. Australia were 173 for 9 when Cummins was out. India had just got themselves back where a chase was reasonable, and although they might have had to bat a little bit in the fading light, the scoreboard pressure was not going to be that big. That is when Scott Boland joined Nathan Lyon. The big Victorian cannot bat, but he can sort of defend, and that's about it. Lyon is a decent number 10 and nothing more. They batted for almost 20 overs against the old ball and the new one at night and in the morning to add 61 runs. Boland in this match twice batted time. 2 epically long innings for a man with his batting talent. The balls were impressive, but the minutes almost mattered more. In the first innings, he batted for 33. In the second, it was 86. And if you add in Mohammad Siraj's first innings, that means number 11s over the first 3 innings were out in the middle for 149 minutes. With Pat Cummins and Nathan Lyon making dueling 41s, it showed that you could bat against the old ball on this wicket. Akashdeep batted for 23 minutes. That was 1 minute more than what India needed from him when they sent him out for the first innings as a night watch. Boland had him caught at short leg, and another one that could have been given out in different circumstances. That brought in Jasprit Bumrah. It was him and Akashdeep that got India past the follow-on at the Gabba. It was an amazing sight to see Virat and Rohit celebrate that landmark almost as much as the Indian team had their first win at Perth. And so far in this series, Bumrah has 1 fewer wicket than Rohit has runs. But we could see him with his hands on his head before coming out to bat. So far, he's been asked to bat and bowl India out of trouble in every single match. And he's almost done it. But Boland got him this time. Now it was Mohammad Siraj, who had batted 30 minutes in the first innings, but had to face Nathan Lyon first and then work out how to handle the new ball afterwards. He never got that far. Australia had won from odds of 27 to 1 by taking 7 wickets at the MCG with an old ball that was doing very little in 1 session. In fact, not even using their entire session. This match was drawn at sea, and yet Australia won it without even needing the second new ball. Australia was gone after the first test, and they were currently up 2-1. Marnus Labuschagne never bowled a delivery in the final session. It took God and the demon to build international cricket, but don't tell Johnny Bairstow. 1882, Australia had played 1 test in England against the god W.G. Grace, and they sucked. So they were playing him again, and it was a tough wicket. But England was in front, so Australia was desperate for a 3rd innings lead. At number 8 was young all-rounder Sammy Jones. After a routine single, he walks down to do some gardening on the pitch. Grace whips off the bails and appeals. The ball wasn't dead, Jones was run out. The Australians were furious. In fact, some of the English players were also furious. But what Grace said went, and the umpires had already given it. Next in was Fred Spofforth. He was known as the demon fast bowler. He was furious, and he let England know exactly what was coming next, which was maiden. There's 12 maidens. I can't count them all. England only needed 85 to win. W.G. Grace made 32. England only 77. That was the test where the Ashes began. Buy my book, Overthrowing Cricket's Empire, on Amazon today.